exist between Queen's Park and Toronto City Hall. This is one of a series of discussions I will have with all of the major party leaders, including the Premier, ultimately leading to the election next year around this time. My objective is not to pick favorites or to put anyone down. I could and I would and I will work constructively with any and all of the leaders, regardless of who ends up in the government and who's in the opposition. I think it's my job to work with them and to make sure they understand the issues from Toronto's perspective and that I understand the job that they have to do. It is my job as mayor to work with all of them, but I also happen to get along well with all of them without exception, so this part of it is not a problem. However, we are dealing here with some very serious issues, which in my view go directly to the economic health and the social health of not just Toronto, but all of Ontario, given the importance that Toronto has to the province and to the country. Traffic and congestion and the resulting social, economic and environmental damage combine to make that a huge issue. People are frustrated about it. They're angry at governments which have put off vital decisions on future transit for decades, putting us in the mess that we're in. I will not be a leader of one of those governments who repeats that. My job has been to formulate a plan for the next series of transit projects we must get on with building to fix traffic and cope with growth, to get them funded and to get them done. I've registered that with Patrick Brown. He understood that as being crucial to the well-being of this entire region, including Toronto. The federal government has put money up for that list of projects, the future transit projects for this region and for this city. We tried to address our share with road tolls, and we'll have to try again. But last week's Ontario budget was silent on this. Simply put, we need them to be at the table with money in hand for the relief line, the Scarborough East LRT and the waterfront transit, the next projects, which, by the way, will be used by tens of thousands of residents of the 905 getting to and from work or to and from the U of T Scarborough campus, in addition to being widely used, of course, by people in the 416 residents of Toronto. On housing, Toronto Community Housing is home to more than 100,000 people, a community basically the same size as Thornhill. It is only moral and practical and fair that Ontario should help us repair that housing they handed off to us, as the federal government has said it will do. Again, this is good for the social health of the province's biggest city, and the repair activity will create a lot of jobs. And so I'm asking for the help of all MPPs to convince the government to come to the table, just as we saw some of them do on road tolls. Si nous abordons un trafic terrible, nous avons besoin d'engagement maintenant sur le transit futur. Si nous prévoyons des conditions de logement médiocres, nous avons besoin de l'aide provinciale pour faire des réparations maintenant. Ce sont des choses qui ne peuvent plus attendre plus longtemps. I will just say that I'm asking for the help of all the MPPs, and I welcome some of the things that Mr. Brown suggested to me today that he and his party will go forward with, and he'll discuss some of those with you. I hope he continues to help me address Toronto issues. I understand he and the Premier and all of the leaders have a province-wide job to do. But I look at addressing some of these Toronto issues as being beyond Toronto because of the importance this city has to the province's economy. People are suffocating in terrible traffic, and they need us to get on with committing ourselves and moving forward with the future transit projects now, and not doing the old game of putting it off for years. People are living in substandard housing today, and they need all the governments to make those repairs happen together now. I look forward to hearing more from Mr. Brown and from the Ontario PC Party as the months unfold leading up to the election, as we all try to do what we're all trying to do, which is to build a stronger, fairer Toronto within a stronger and fairer Ontario. I'm very delighted to have here and to be able to have him come to the podium now, the Leader of the Opposition, Leader of the Ontario PCs, Patrick Brown.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to join you here today with Mayor John Tory. We had a great discussion on shared priorities, including our commitment to make life more affordable in Toronto and across the province. From our discussions, it's clear that Premier Wynne and the Liberals have taken Toronto for granted for far too long. We saw this result last year. We had the Scarborough Rouge River by-election, a riding that has been a Liberal fortress for decades since its creation, and they lost. Last week's budget is yet another reminder that Premier Wynne has turned their back on Ontario taxpayers, Toronto taxpayers, the city and the mayor. Toronto is my second home. I actually grew up at St. Clair and Bathurst, went to school in the city of Toronto. I care greatly about Toronto. In many respects, it's my second home, although I reside in Simcoe North. Now that I'm in the legislature, I'm back in this great city of Toronto. So when I talk about Toronto, it's not just as leader of the Ontario PC Party, it's as a resident of the city who cares deeply about the city of Toronto and its future. Toronto deserves a premier that will stand up for the city, and the mayor deserves a partner he can trust to fulfill commitments from the province to the City of Toronto. I am committed to being that partner. That is why today the Ontario PCs are announcing measures that will help Toronto families pay less and get ahead. First, we've heard from Mayor John Tory about the people who are evicted from Toronto Community Housing Corporation for committing serious crimes, jailed, and when released, reapply for community housing. Violent individuals can be considered disadvantaged and be moved to the top of the waiting list, taking priority over vulnerable families who have been waiting for years to access community housing. So in many respects, you have a waiting list of 82,000 families, and then you have convicted criminals jumping the queue. In order to stop this, you need provincial approval, which the Liberal government has refused to give. This, frankly, is outrageous. It's time to put vulnerable and law-abiding Toronto residents in community housing ahead of criminals. An Ontario PC government would allow the city to block violent criminals for reapplying to live in community housing. We will be introducing a private member's bill to this effect to allow the Liberal government to vote on this important issue, and we'll be introducing that private member's bill in the very near future. Second, I will work with the city to allow social housing to purchase natural gas at lower rates, something Premier Wynne has refused. Toronto could be saving $6.3 million per year simply by buying natural gas independently instead of being forced by the province to purchase it through a provincial bulk purchasing entity called the Housing Services Corporation. Despite this evidence and repeated calls by Mayor John Tory and PC housing critic Ernie Hardman, the government still refuses to allow municipalities to opt out of purchasing through Housing Services Corporation. We would allow Toronto to opt out of the Housing Services Corporation. Third, I know the mayor has worked to reduce red tape and streamline the development process to increase supply and affordability in the housing market, and I have stressed supply is a significant issue. Premier Wynne's recent housing plan failed to address this. Red tape still runs rampant, and in the provincial budget, they're actually predicting 6,500 less new builds. For example, when I talk about this red tape that is suffocating the building of new supply, the Provincial Strong Communities Act increased municipal review times for planning applications, delaying the building of new housing supply. The review time for amendments and approvals have doubled. For zoning, it's gone up 25%, and for consent applications, 33%. They have delayed the planning process left, right, and centre. The Ontario PCs will work with Mayor Tory to reduce red tape and streamline processes in the housing market where provincial approval may be necessary. Next, we need to keep Toronto moving, and I know how important the Scarborough subway is to Mayor Tory and the people of Toronto. It's been voted on, I understand, 9 times here. The Ontario PC Party, and by the way, 9 times every time it's been supported. I think every single Scarborough politician, save one, at every level supports the Scarborough subway. The Ontario PC Party unequivocally supports the Scarborough subway. The people of Scarborough have watched as the Liberal government sat on its hands for 14 years while Scarborough's transit needs were ignored. The government only supported the project when it was politically convenient during the 2013 Scarborough-Guildwood by-election, and then they said they were going to get shovels into the ground. But talk is cheap. The people want to see action. A PC government would ensure shovels actually get into the ground for the Scarborough subway. We also want to see Smart Track built. Smart Track is not just connecting people to employment in Toronto, it also connects areas throughout the GTA by using underutilized rail corridors. An Ontario PC government would instruct Metrolinx to treat this project as a priority and direct Metrolinx to make Smart Track fares uniform with TTC fares. That's important. The Smart Track fares need to be uniform with the TTC fares. In addition, Premier Wynne and her government, including Metrolinx, must personally intervene to ensure Bombardier delivers their vehicles on time and on budget for the Eglinton Crosstown. Metrolinx and their government's oversight over key infrastructure and transit projects has been abysmal. We saw that in the Auditor General's report. Premier Wynne needs to stop passing the buck to Metrolinx and personally ensure Bombardier delivers for the largest transit project currently underway in Canada. And finally, as elected leaders, it is our responsibility to work together. That is why we are announcing regular meetings between myself and Mayor Tory to discuss shared priorities, as well as formalize already occurring meetings at the staff level. Today, I want to make it clear that unlike Premier Wynne and her Liberals, we are not taking any part of the City of Toronto for granted. Toronto needs a partner they can trust and rely on, who honors commitments that have been made by the province. The Ontario PC Party wants to be that partner and assure Toronto families who work hard, pay less, and get ahead in life. We will fight for the City of Toronto, and we will be cheering on the Toronto Raptors. I wish I could still be cheering on the Toronto Maple Leafs, but thank you so much for coming here today, and thank you for this opportunity.
Questions for us?
At 9:13 today, we all got an email with Minister of Transportation Del Duca meeting outside the front doors of your office here to have a press conference. Did you know about this and your thoughts on the last-minute press conference?
Well, obviously, Mr. Del Duca is welcome at City Hall anytime. I would hope he might be coming with some good news in terms of some funding for future transit projects, which the federal government has stepped up to finance, or with with some money for Toronto community housing repairs, which I've been talking about since I became mayor, and my predecessors talked about it before that. But they're always most welcome here at City Hall. I'll be most interested in hearing what they have to say, and I hope that they decide they're going to address the future, because I have said many times, and as proof of that, read the Toronto Sun from Sunday, where a column there by Liz Braun said, and I quote, "For a guy widely quoted for criticizing Premier Wynne's recent budget, Tory went out of his way to give credit where due to this provincial funding for supportive housing." I think you know that I start almost every statement that I make by reciting the things they have done, including the Eglinton Crosstown, including the hotel tax, including some land they're putting up for housing. But I'm talking about the future when it comes to transit. The fact we can't repeat, just sort of putting off indefinitely commitments that we have to make to building more transit to relieve this nightmarish traffic. And I'm talking about housing repairs that need to be made today, especially after the city has put $1 billion in. So I'm happy they're here, and I'll be most interested, as I'm sure you will be, in what it is they have to say.
Are you surprised they're here?
Nothing surprises me in any of the day-to-day, responsibilities and events that happen when you're in a job like this, and I'm sure Mr. Brown finds the same thing. You take each minute as it comes. Do you want to comment on that?
Maybe just add in, I'm glad that it, normally it takes a by-election loss for them to start to pay attention to the City of Toronto. I'm glad that I could be of help in getting the Liberal cabinet to start paying attention to Toronto again. Maybe if I have press conferences on a regular basis at Toronto City Hall, they'll show up here more often.